All right, we're good to go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on structuring communications around race and racism, which is a great topic of the moment and one that needs to be discussed. So this is brought to you by Imprimis Group, and we're in the staffing and recruiting business, and we operate under the names Imprimis, Bravo Tech, Freeman Leonard, and Answer Team. And I'm Valerie Freeman. I'm the founder and the CEO of these companies. So today, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our speaker, Sophia Johnson. And even though Sophia has been in this market for a long time and has a really fabulous business, I didn't know her until I met her in February in Bogota, Colombia, of all places, which is a long story and not one for today. But I got to know Sophia and learned about her marketing and advertising business that she started 17 years ago, and she has built it into the largest minority-owned, female minority-owned advertising and marketing company in Texas. And she has, she's married and she has 4 children, and she has a very unique philosophy about her business. So Sophia, at this point, would you tell us a little bit about your background and your philosophy of doing business?
Sure. I've had my company for 17 years. Our company is ABI, which is short for Alpha Business Images. We are a full service ad agency in downtown Dallas and also in Fort Worth. I will tell you that one of the distinguishing factors about our firm is that we have a very diverse staff. And it is intentional because we feel like in order for you to reach a global audience or the diverse American audience, you really need people in the creative process that have the background of the audience that we're trying to reach. So we are intentionally Black, white, Indian, Latino, older, younger, different age groups. And that all plays into a proprietary system that we have called Audience 360, which means that we want to help our clients get 360 degrees of the audience. We don't believe in this concept of general market. We don't believe that there is a general market. And then you take general market advertising and then you put a Hispanic face on it and you add Spanish and you call it Hispanic advertising, or the same with the African American audience. We believe that creativity really needs to start with a diverse group of people so that our clients don't miss out on any money. Everybody's buying burgers, plane tickets, cars, and we want to make sure that they see themselves in the advertising.
Great, thank you. So Sophia has a lot of very well-known clients and a great reputation. So I wanted everybody to know about her and her business because we're all about helping each other in this pandemic. And I think that she definitely has a business that everyone could use at this time. So let's now start talking about communication on race and racism. And Sophia wanted to start by talking about what is racism exactly, because we all have a sort of a different definition of it. So Sophia, go ahead and tell us about your definition of racism.
Okay, I really did want to start with that, Valerie, because I feel like it's such a polarizing word when people hear it. And when they hear it, they feel like, and that certainly doesn't apply to me, right? Because it sounds so like you're a terrible person. But I really want to level set on this and talk about what we're going to use as the definition for racism throughout this particular webinar. Racism is based on this idea that there's some ability or some characteristics or some qualities of your race that makes you inferior and me superior, or vice versa, that makes me inferior and you superior. And because of some of the things that we've seen in videos lately, I think that we equate that with racism because it says, my race is inviting you to have this really bad behavior. And so people see a George Floyd video or an Ahmaud Arbery video and they say, I get that, that's racism. But I also want us to understand that racism can play out in limiting opportunity, which means that it's going to prevent equality and it's going to produce and reinforce an inferior result. An example of that is our former First Lady, Michelle Obama, was talking to her counselor about, I am thinking about going to an Ivy League school. I'm thinking about going to Princeton. And her counselor replied, not really sure that you're Princeton material. So that's not going to make a video. That's not something that we would look at and say, that's really inviting bad behavior. That's something that a counselor says, there's something about you and your characteristics that I think are inferior. She did go on, of course, to go to Princeton and become the First Lady of the United States. But I want people to understand that it can be as subtle as saying, I don't think you're Princeton material, or as egregious as keeping your knee on someone's neck for almost 9 minutes. So I want us to think about it in its full breadth of these really hostile things, but also these microaggressions like, I don't think you're Princeton material, or for instance, I'm wearing my hair in this style, and in some places it's considered unprofessional, even though this is the natural texture of my hair. So these microaggressions all the way to egregious behavior really are examples of racism. And I want us to think about that as we go through this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. That I don't think people really do think about that, and you're right in bringing that to light. So, you know, as we know that companies and individuals have provided statements condemning racism, and some of them have been criticized for being insincere, inauthentic, and appear like sound bites out of a standard playbook. So how do you suggest companies build a campaign around this without looking off-brand or looking like they're just copying stuff that has no meaning?
So I think that's a great question. I've actually helped some nonprofits of boards that I've served on really craft better statements that are authentic. And I think that what happened when everybody saw the video and this whole tidal wave came about is we saw the video and we said, oh, this is horrific and Black people shouldn't be treated this way. And we all wanted to answer as companies and individuals to say, we think that's terrible because Black people should be treated equally. But once you're saying that Black people should be treated equally, now people, when you make that statement, that's kind of like saying, I'm applying for the job of equality. And then people look at your resume. And I think that's where companies are stumbling, is that when people look at their resume, once you've raised your hand and said, oh, I apply for equality, people go, okay, well, can I look at your resume and have you actually done things that show that? There was a statement made by a Black Lives Matter activist that said, I am looking at, let's look at what your hiring looks like. Let's look at what your senior management looks like. Let's look at what your procurement looks like. And so when you think about a campaign or you think about a statement, I will say that it has to begin with what's authentic to your company. And let's say you haven't done a lot, you're a small business. I think you also have to say, what do I know? Because part of what's in your resume, there's that area called education. And I think that you have to say, what do I know about this topic I'm really wading into? And so I know we're going to talk about this at the end. I've given a list of resources. I think it's really important before companies jump in and make a campaign as opposed to just a statement, that their campaign is built on knowledge. Are you familiar with the Black experience? Do you understand what's happened since 1619? Do you even know what the 13th Amendment is? Are you familiar with Jim Crow laws? Do you understand the environment that's happening professionally with Black professionals, with only 3% of them in senior management? If you really don't have kind of a umbrella view of what's going on, you can create a campaign in a vacuum, and it can really cause problems in the end, because people will challenge you and say, I don't think that that's authentic, what you're saying, and I don't think it's based in knowledge. So that's what I would encourage, is that businesses really respond from authenticity, and they respond from having a knowledge base. And a lot of us don't. I know a lot of us are out grabbing articles and reading books. I think that that's really important, because I think that then allows you to make an authentic statement for your business, not only where you stand, but what you're going to do about it.
So do you, can you think of a company right off the bat that that you think is doing a good job of communicating, or is it too soon and they're just getting started?
No, I actually think there are a couple of companies, Valerie, that have done a great job, but I think it's also because they were tackling this issue before it happened. One of my colleagues forwarded me a video the other day from P&G called The Look. And it's an excellent, excellent video. I would encourage everybody, get on YouTube, just put in P&G The Look. But P&G also has a site up that is specifically about race. But Procter & Gamble is doing an outstanding job of actually understanding what's going on. I saw a Pepsi commercial the other day, and Pepsi did a great thing. They wanted to speak about race, and specifically about Black Americans, and they hired an African-American agency to do the work, because that agency was going to know best. I think Nike has done a fantastic job. When the whole Colin Kaepernick blow up happened, and the president was really standing against him, and a lot of owners were standing against him, it created a divide in our country of, are you standing with the flag or are you standing with Cap? And Nike just stood with Cap. They just said, we believe that this is wrong. We believe that he's protesting in an appropriate way, and we are going to stand with him now. Now they're looking like they made the right decision, but at the time it was super controversial. So those are two companies that really stand out for doing it right. But I also did a LinkedIn article, Valerie, about a local organization here, DFW Airport, and talked about the airport specifically, because I think that what they did is what I have coined corporate humility. And their CEO came out and said, I think that I haven't really, I don't know first what it's like. I'm a white male. I haven't experienced discrimination. And maybe that's why we haven't put enough time and energy into this, is because we are not experiencing it. And also saying these diversity and inclusion efforts and achievements are not enough. I really have to stop and say, what's happening with my Black colleagues? And I call it corporate humility, because he was saying, right now, I'm not important. You are important. And I'm going to create an environment where I can have a conversation with you. And companies can do that through a Zoom call with their internal audiences, but they can do it externally too, where they're really inviting conversation and saying, tell me what's been happening, because I don't know. And I really want to sit down and listen. And what I'm feeling is less important, and what you're feeling is more important. And so I think that locally, DFW Airport is doing an incredible job.
Thanks. Well, you know, it's when we're all busy and we look around us and we see professionals like you and other Black professionals, we seem to think everything's okay. You know, y'all are doing well, so what's the problem? So we'll talk about that a little more later too. Go ahead.
Well, I just think that you're exactly right. You heard this statement a lot after President Obama was elected. Well, we are post-racial because President Obama is elected, but there are so many statistics outside of having a Black president, that even with having a Black president, it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed today. And police brutality is just one look at it. But I think for companies, a real look at it is how many Black professionals are in senior management. Why is it that on the S&P 500, that the companies in the S&P 500, 1/3 of them don't have one Black director as their board of directors? So you can see it in corporate America. You can see it in the procurement practices. And so when you look and you say you have a handful, the fact that kind of everybody will know the 5 African American firms in Dallas and who runs those, but there's no way we can know all of the white firms in Dallas, that lets you know that there's an issue.
Right, I agree. So, you know, are companies going to have a backlash on either taking a stand or not taking a stand? What do you see out there in terms of any kind of backlash about taking a stand or not taking a stand, or is there any problem there?
So I think that the more you are a consumer facing company, the more you're going to get it externally. But I think internally, you're saying something to your staff, to your team, if you're not making any statement at all. So if you have Black colleagues in your company, you're saying to them, I realize this is really important to you, but we're not going to talk about it. And that is so incredibly painful, because there is a wound that has been opened that everybody is talking about. And imagine that everybody is talking about it and you're not saying anything. And basically you're signaling as a leader, we're not going to talk about this issue. And you're not just talking to your current employee pool, you're talking to your future employee pool, and you're letting them know where you stand. But let's say that you're also external facing, you're a consumer brand. The internet is hot with what companies are or are not doing. They are making statements, and there are some that are making statements and they've had issues with race in the past, and the social media environment is calling them out. There are social media handles that are just for companies being reviewed based on, do they have anybody that's Black in senior management? Do they promote in their company? Do they have diversity in their marketing? So it's very easy for people to look at your commercials and your flyers and your ads and say, do I ever see anybody that looks like me? So I think that there definitely has to be a statement made internally. And if you're consumer facing, definitely externally, because there's a wound out there that everybody's talking about. And nobody likes the leader that says, I don't care if you're hurting, we're not going to talk about that. When it should be a time where we're really, really inviting conversation. And after that conversation, we're inviting and how do we change this? Because people are not just interested in, I have pain. They're also interested in, and now what are we going to do about it? And that is not sectioned off by police brutality. The desire for equality extends to those of us who are interacting with the police, all the way to those of us who are interacting with the boardroom. And so I think that companies are struggling if they're putting it in this little bucket of, this really is about police brutality and we need to hold police accountable. Mm-hmm. For those of us that are African American professionals, we're looking and saying, okay, well, why is there 97% of the contracts in the city of Fort Worth that are not going to Black companies? So racism, for it to truly be racism, Valerie, it cannot just be that it's happening with people suspected of crimes, because that could be under the umbrella of, that's a criminal issue. It's racism when everybody of that race gets that same type of treatment, no matter where they're the environment they're in. So if they're in the corporate environment or they're on the street being suspected, when they're getting that treatment of you are inferior, you are suspect, you are a possible criminal, that's what makes it racism.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you, and I know that people have said that if you address class inequality, you'll have equality. And so now we know that it doesn't matter what level you are, you experience racism no matter what. And so, you know, racism, go ahead. Not true. You're right. You're right. Well,
Well, I
let's,
would just say absolutely, because you're hearing so many Black professionals now that this environment has been created so that Black people across the board are saying, I wasn't saying anything about it, but now I'm going to speak up. You're hearing about so many professionals saying, I was pulled over. I was asked to get out of my car and sit in handcuffs while they searched. I was searched by police dogs. Every time I see the police, I'm nervous. You're starting to hear more and more people tell you their horror stories that are just your average friend that you thought, I never knew that you went through that. And so it's definitely across the board that this injustice is taking place. It is not, when a police person is pulling you over, they can't see that you have a degree. They don't know that you are articulate. They don't know that you have an office job. What they see is your Black skin. Or in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, they don't know who he is. They just see a Black man running through the street. And so the idea that if you have a degree or if you live in a certain neighborhood, you are no longer going to be subjected. I think there's enough video out there now and enough statistics for people to know that that's not accurate.
Well, when you're talking about systemic obstacles, how do you link, or you should link history or cause history with effect or outcome, so that your readers can understand that people of color are not doing something wrong? So how would you mesh those two, history and outcomes?
So I think that this is a great question for companies to consider for communication. When you're in a social media post and you're trying to do something that's 20 words or less, you're not necessarily going to be able to address history and what's happening currently. You can address, this is what I'm for or this is what I'm against. But I think that because it's so much more than that, and you're talking about internal communications, what's on your intranet, what you're saying to consumers as you go through a campaign. This is when I go back to what I said at the beginning. It's so important for leadership to really be immersed in the history of the Black experience before they're making statements, because then you have an opportunity to be authentic. When you know the material, when you've taken the time to have a Zoom call with your Black colleagues, when you're reading history, when you're looking at the statistics and how vast the disparity is, then when you make a statement, it can be coming from an authentic place. And I think that's what's really important, is the statement without context, when it's anything longer, it doesn't ring as powerful, for one. So it's a much more powerful statement to say, we have got to improve contracting in our city, and I'm for equality. That's a statement. It's a much more powerful statement to say 97% of contracts going to African Americans is completely out of order. And we have got to do something to change this, so it's looking more like 15% or 20%, that there will no longer be disparity. That's a much more powerful statement. But in order for you to make that statement, you have to be informed about, well, let me figure out what's wrong first before I start making statements about how I'm going to get involved and fix it. And that's when those are the statements that end up being generic, or where people review what's going on with you and find that they're disingenuous, is when you haven't done your homework and you can't put your statement in context.
So, you know, all this happened, and companies sent out their statements against racism, and now what do we do? I mean, you know, so for us, we sent out a statement, and then we decided to have this webinar, and what what should we keep doing, or what would be good in terms of like a company like ours in terms of our communication? Should we profile some of our Black employees and their backgrounds? What should we do?
So Valerie, I love this question, and I'm getting it a lot. And I have boiled it down to 3 P's to help people remember. And it's protest, promote, and purchase. And for protest, I think that you're doing that. And when I say that, I just mean use your voice. And Valerie Freeman and Imprimis Group is saying, we are going to use our voice to say, we are protesting against inequality. And this webinar is doing that. It's any way of using your voice to say, I am for equality, I am for justice. And so I would say continue to use your voice in whatever you can, whether it's webinars, it's articles you're posting on your intranet, but any way that you're using your voice. I will also say that even for the smallest companies, it's also about promotion. So what you see, when you see companies being criticized, it's, okay, well, you've hired somebody Black, but are they in the same position that they were? Are they being mentored to be groomed up the corporate ladder? So I think that for big companies and small companies, what does your promotion look like? Because you'll see article after article and research after research that even when companies are hiring Black professionals, they're not promoting them after that. They're getting in there and they're not making it to senior leadership. There are very few CEOs. I think in the Fortune 500, there are 4 African-American CEOs. We're not on board in board of director seats. So I think promote is another, whether that's small or big. And then finally, I think it has to do with purchase. And when I mean purchase, I mean, what do your procurement practices look like? And do you have a kind of a morality clause about who you're going to buy from and who you're not? And I will first talk about procurement. There are some organizations that have been in business for 40, 50, 70 years, and they've been doing business with the same vendors for 30 years. Well, what that looks like is there probably weren't very many Black companies open at that time. We were living under Jim Crow laws in the 60s. We still have 2 generations of Americans that are living right now that were subject to Jim Crow laws. And so if you've been buying and you say, well, I've always bought my printing from them, that's always been my human resource agency, then you're probably not going to be buying from Black owned companies. And so I know people have been using the monopoly game, but this is what comes to mind is if you've been shut out of the monopoly game while it's been occurring, all of the properties have already been purchased. And so when you start now and you say, okay, we're for equality, everybody's going to get $200 to pass go. That's great. But the Black people involved are never going to gain wealth because all the properties have already been purchased. This was already happening before we got in the game. And so now when you think about who are you buying from, you have to look at procurement and say, I'm going to intentionally look for African-American owned firms that have this product or this service. I think it also means, are there firms that have really egregious practices that make it clear that there's racism in that company, and then I'm not going to buy from them. It was from a colleague that I heard that there are venture capital firms that are saying, we are not going to buy from S&P 500, firms that are in the S&P 500 that don't have Black people on their board of directors anymore until they change what they're doing. And so I think that it's also in your purchase power. And we do that as individuals. When somebody ticks us off, we say, I'm not buying from that store anymore. I think it's really important for us to use our purchase dollars to either boycott or to bring new companies into our procurement practice, and just go back and look and be able to ask whoever is in charge of your purchasing, do we do work with any Black owned firms? And why not? And who else is out there? And I will tell you that this is something that is not talked about, Valerie, as much, but there's going to be some discomfort when you look at some of your friends you've been doing business with for 40 years. And if you just take one contract and move it to a Black owned firm, there's going to be some discomfort in that relationship. But as companies say, we stand for justice, we stand for equality. This is a demonstration of you standing for that. And as you're continuing your campaign, you're going to want to communicate to your consumers, these are the changes we've made. Some of them were uncomfortable, some of them, they were great, but these are the changes we've made. And it may be, this is a different procurement practice we have now. And now we're looking to get 30, 40, 50% of our vendors to be diverse vendors. These are the people in our company we promoted. This is actually a Black colleague we've never featured, and we want to feature them. This is a nonprofit that we've partnered with that is supporting Black achievement. And this is how we've been able to make progress in our city. So when I think about what you can do going forward, I really want to emphasize those three things: protest, use your voice, promote, and then what's your procurement look like? What's your purchasing look like? Including what do you do with your nonprofit dollars? So that's really where I would say I would put my energy. And those are things that you can report on a year from now when people might be thinking, oh, I forgot about Black Lives Matter, or I forgot about equality, or I forgot about justice. If it's really a part of your DNA to say you're for equality and justice, a year from now in your newsletters, a year from now in your annual report, you will be talking about, this is what we did in the fight for justice and equality.
Well, I see some of that a parallel to what's happened with women in the workplace and women-owned businesses.
Absolutely.
And that, you know, when they started really saying, we're not gonna buy from you, or we're not going to do whatever, you know, if you don't have a diverse board. And what that ended up being was adding a woman, you know. And so, you know, Black women were put in the women category and Black men in the men category, as opposed to ethnic diversity. But, you know, we focused on it as a group, women as a group focused on it, and we got men to help us, right? And it's starting to change and making a difference. So, you know, if we want it to happen and we all work together, because, you know, Black people can't do it all on their own. And they have to have sponsors and helpers, that we can have a more equal society. But, you know, I see it. I mean, I guess it was the morning news that had a list of Black-owned restaurants, right? Somebody did. D Magazine, one of them had a list of Black-owned restaurants. And I thought, well, you know, I didn't even know. I had no idea. So we all went out, and we all each, in Imprimis, we all each went to a different Black-owned restaurant, and either got the food to take out or have it delivered, just because we feel like, you know, we're a small company. We can't do everything. We can't give millions of dollars like Nike can, but we can do our small part in helping with economic security, really, because you're right. You know, Black-owned businesses need support as well, and don't get the opportunities necessarily that white-owned businesses do. So I think it's we need to pay attention.
I want to add to that.
Go ahead.
I want to add that, Valerie, because I think it's really important, a couple of things that you said, but one is the list that came out of Black-owned restaurants, and I saw another list that was Black-owned candle makers. And I think that it's really important that these businesses are getting visibility. But one of my challenges with that is some of the companies that are really positioned for wealth building, it's hard for you to have a really wealth building business being one of 400 candle makers in an area. But what we're having trouble seeing in procurement practices are, what about construction companies? What about concrete companies? What about manufacturers? What about human resource agencies? In the case of us, an ad agency. But some of those businesses that are really positioned to not only build wealth, but then create another office and another office and another office. I'm hoping that we'll see our media cover some of the organizations that should be wealthy, but in the environment that we're in have still not transitioned over to really growing the way that they see their peers growing that are white-owned organizations. And I also wanted to double down on what you said. One of the things I love about what's going on, you were talking about how men started joining in the Me Too movement. I am loving that. It doesn't matter if I attend a protest or if I'm online. I have just as many white friends as Black friends jumping in the argument and fiercely saying, this is enough. We're not putting up with it anymore. I've got people sending me agendas of what they're going to do in their companies and tough conversations that they're having. And so I think that that's so important. I've got people telling me that they've opened the door to conversations in their companies, because I can tell you for myself, there are things that I'm saying about my Black experience that I would not have said 2 months ago, or I would not have said a year ago, because it is part of my professional Black experience to rise to the occasion and to not be the complainer, to not be the protester, but to be good, greater, better than, often what we see with women also, Valerie. And so this environment now that's been created where Black colleagues, Black students, activists, it doesn't matter, people are finally saying, this is my experience. And you've got white colleagues telling other white colleagues, you have to listen to them, because we haven't been listening. And so I love that there is this really diverse environment of people stepping up. And it makes me hopeful that this is that time, that we had this great time of Reconstruction from 1865 to 1870, and it was shut down for 150 years. But I feel like we might be on this precipice of this new Reconstruction, where it is a broad base of people saying, we're not putting up with it anymore. We're for equality. Everything else, too bad. We're doing it. Whoever's feelings get hurt, whoever gets outed, it really doesn't matter. But we're doing this thing. We're making it right now.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of communicating, going forward, do you feel like, I mean, we should just keep up the messaging and the webinars and the social media to keep talking about these issues? Because you're right, in the beginning it's hard to talk about some of this stuff that's going on. I mean, I wouldn't think about going up to a Black employee and saying, well, tell me about your experience. I wouldn't have done that. I would have felt like I was overstepping my bounds. But now I don't feel that way. And so, but to communicate that and keep it going and say it's okay to talk about it and so on, it's might be a good thing, instead of just one statement or one webinar and then that's the end of it.
I completely agree, because I think that if that's the case, it's a high likelihood that your statement on equality was disingenuous. You've got to have the conversations. You've got to do the reading. As much as you're going to gain from conversations, you've got to go back and do the reading. You've got to look at some videos and read some books and really figure out, what is this whole world I missed? I didn't even know it was happening. You've got to go back and do that. But I think that continuing the conversation is important, and that only happens by holding yourself accountable. So you've really got to, like we do with everything else, how often am I going to talk about this? Who's going to lead this effort? Who's going to look at the metrics and see where we stand? You've got to have KPIs for this like you have for everything else, so that when you look a year from now, you can see that you didn't stumble on the job, but you were actually successful. So what are we going to do in our newsletter? What are we going to do on our intranet? What are we going to say to our consumers? How are we convening our Black colleagues? Let me look at my promotion efforts, and how have we done? Are we mentoring? Let me look at my purchasing efforts. If I look a year from now, have I changed 30% of my procurement spend? Whether it's a small business or a big business. I own a small business, but we're spending millions of dollars with other small businesses. And so can I look a year from now and say, I've changed out one of every 4 of my vendors? So I think it's important in telling other people what you're going to do, because once you voice it, then you're being held accountable. So being able to tell your board of directors or your senior leadership or your Black colleagues, we're going to talk about this every month or every quarter. We are going to address this in these different ways. So I think it's really important to put some KPIs in place, Valerie, so that we can hold ourselves accountable and the conversation continues, because we cannot undo in 3 months what happened in 1619 and think that it's going to be all absolved and fixed in 3 months. So we definitely have to keep our foot on the gas on this.
Right. But we want people to share what they're doing so we all get ideas about best practices and what things really work and so on. So I would encourage everybody to communicate through whatever means to talk about what they're doing and what's successful, so that the rest of us can copy something good that they're doing.
Exactly. I completely agree. Like, I love that you're promoting restaurants. I hope another list comes out of different types of businesses, and all of us can say, I didn't know that they did that. I didn't know that that was a Black housing developer. We were talking about doing something in our area. So those are the kind of things that I think are ideas worth stealing. But one of the things I've also noticed is people are sharing resources. And I think that that's super important. Mm-hmm. When you see an article, when you see a video and you go, oh my gosh, that I have to tell somebody. But you're seeing a lot of it around race and Black people. And I think it's really important that we keep those doors open for how can we share resources.
Well, 95% of the businesses out there are small businesses. And, we just don't have the resources really to even know who's who in our community sometimes. And then we're also fighting the pandemic and trying to stay in business. So this is a really challenging time. You're trying to stay in business and do the right things and combat racism. So, we have a lot on our plates, and but we can't lose sight of the fact that all of this has come to light, and it's very important that we understand what's going on out there, and we understand the Black experience, and then we can't just look at a few successful Black people and think everything is okay. And so I'm thankful for you, Sophia, to come on and share your thoughts, because this probably wouldn't have happened 6 months ago, more than likely.
No, absolutely. But I think that just like it was time for the Me Too movement to come, it was time for really people to pay attention to what was happening with women and how that opened the door. I think that it is time for us to have the conversation about the Black experience in America and not only what happened, not just talking about history, but what's happening today and how completely terrible the statistics are today. And it's not confined to police brutality. It extends to your everyday life. It extends to corporate America. It extends to wealth. 98% of the land in the US is owned by white people. That is a jarring statistic. And so, and that's today. That's how it used to be in 1860. That's how it is in 2020. So I think that this conversation's time has come. And just like all of us did everything we could a year ago when we were really, really focused on women, we have to stay focused on women, but we have to stay focused on equality and what's happening to Black citizens. For all of us who are for equality, it doesn't stop with one group, but I think it's especially important that we're paying attention to the Black experience, because I think that the conversation really fell down after the 60s. And it's kind of what you were talking about when you were saying we saw a couple of successes and we felt better. I think that's what you saw. You saw the Civil Rights Act pass and you saw some successes and we kind of went, well, it's better. But then we get to 2020 and we see the stats and we know that it's actually not better at all. For the last 70 years, Black wealth has not grown. And so there's a problem, and it's called racism.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I would encourage all of you that listened in today to link in with Sophia. Her company is ABI, and what is your email?
My email is sjohnson, SJOHNSON @ and then it gets long, at Alpha, ALPHA, business, BUSINESS, images, IMAGES.com. That's why we say ABI, because Alpha Business Images is a mouthful. But right. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I know Valerie put the article up that we just wrote about corporate humility. We're on Instagram. Our website is www.alphabusinessimages.com, and I would love to connect. I also want to say that I am such a big Valerie Freeman fan. She is I look up to her. I'm a big admirer. You talk about an entrepreneurial spirit. She is a titan that I hope to be. So I was honored that you asked me to join this. And I would encourage everybody to communicate, to learn, keep the communication lines open. And like I said, protest, promote, and look at your purchasing.
All right. Well, I'm not going to forget those 3 words. I love those. And Sophia also gave me a list of resources, and I'll be she's going to send it to me and Chloe, my marketing person, and then we're going to send that out to everybody. So you will get that. We've also made a video of this program that will be available on our website. So thank you, Sophia, for all this great information. And thank all of you for attending the webinar today. So be safe, wear your masks, and don't congregate with a whole lot of people that aren't wearing their masks, for heaven's sake. So have a great weekend and a great week. Bye.